welcome today on our talk. And today we will talk about design our regulation compliance strategy. What topics will be involved? What is the first? Let's understand a few concepts. What is the compliance and some regulations? What is the compliance strategy? And how to design the compliance strategy? Okay, so let's begin. First, understand what is the compliance concept and how this is connected with our data. So in our businesses, the enterprises, it can be even some SaaS applications, the data is one of the most precious thing and is getting more important than ever for organizations. But when we have data, it can be data about our personnel, it can be data of our customers, or even some, for example, financial data. It's become more and more responsible on our side to what we can do with this data, when we can store this data, how we can transfer this data, for example, especially when we are, for example, the financial institutions, and especially when we go to the cloud, because on the on-premise environment, it was much easier to deal with data because in the most scenarios, the data reside only in the single data center. So we have the full control of the data, where this data is stored and how is the data transferred. But when we go to the cloud, we need to deal with data residency, because the governance have, for example, some regulations what we can do with this data, or even if we are able to store this data only in the single region, or maybe we can move this data between regions to have some redundancy or not. So so we need to deal with data residency. We need also to deal with data sovereignty, because we store in most cases in our systems, we store some kind of personal data, which can be subject of law and regulations in different countries. So, for example, we have application deployed in the European region, but we consume data from USA, and we need, for example, deal with some regulations which is connected with some governance specifications for the USA region. We need also to deal with the privacy, and probably you know that in the European region we have the GDPR law. So it tells us what we can do with this data, what, for example, what kind of information we need to give to our customers, and what customers can do with this data as well. And we need to put this information on our web pages or in our systems. And of course, we need to deal with this data in our databases. Okay, so we know what is the compliance, but how to define the compliance strategy? The first thing is to understand what data and what regulations is connected, or standards is connected to our business or type of industry. A second. Oh, sorry. We need to understand what regulation is connected to our industry and what type of data we store in our systems. If we know this information, the next step is to implement some kind of policies to what to do with this data. If we are finished this step, we need to incrementally improve the quality of these policies to know what will happen to this data and what we should do with this data, or maybe we should also to improve and look what are changes in the regulations for the specific industry. And the next step is to monitor the sustain and the monitor the compliance and standards. Okay, so the compliance strategy. It's the first when we go to the cloud and, for example, in Office 365, the first step is to implement governance, especially the data governance, so we know what we do, and we are able to monitor, audit, and report what happened to our systems, and what data is used by our systems and what data is not used by our systems, and how this data is processed by our systems. So the first step is to implement some kind of governance on the data and on our systems. The governance can be connected also with not only with data, but it can be only connected with with infrastructure, because some regulations required from us that we should use for the specific industry should use, for example, two-factor authentication in our business. Later, I'll give you some examples how these regulations can look like. The next step is to understand what type of risk is related to our business and data. Yes, I know today I will talk about many things about the data, but this is the main is mainly connected with this. So we need to understand what risk is connected with this and what happens if this data will be stolen, for example, or there can be some kind of malicious activity against this data. And we need also to think about, this is one of risks, what we can do with disaster recovery and business continuity and how we deal with this problem. And the next step, but not last, is the compliance itself. So we need to understand what regulations, for example, the type of regulations can be ISO 27001 or NIST, or, for example, in the healthcare industry, it can be HIPAA regulations that tell us what we can do in our infrastructure, in our data, and, for example, with data of our employees. Okay, and the 4 steps how to design the compliance strategy. The first is understood what we do. The next step is to periodically perform some analysis and reports and audits against against the regulations and compliance in our data and our infrastructure. The third step is to check our workload, so our services which we are using in the cloud. And the last step is use the Microsoft Trust Center. And I will show you in a few minutes. Okay, so what tools do we have? The first tool is the Microsoft Trust Center. The second one is the Compliance Manager. When we are using the Office 365, we can also use the PureView Compliance Manager. And of course, the audit reports, which are in the Azure Defender and in the Compliance Manager. And let's see the Microsoft Trust Center as the first step at what this gives us. The Trust Center, maybe I will share only the window, it will be much better. So the Trust Center is the central hub when we can track the news about the latest regulations and how Microsoft treat the privacy and what Microsoft do with data, and what we agree when we go to the Microsoft Cloud or Office 365. And the next, so we can go through the privacy, for example, and that's for the GDPR role. And sorry. And here we can understand what the regulations connected from the Microsoft 365, and we can learn a lot about GDPR. But I think the most interesting parts are the compliance overview. So this is the part of Compliance Manager. But we can download, for example, the white papers about compliance in the cloud and what Microsoft can do. But also we can, in the Microsoft Trust Center, we can go to our industry specific things. And for example, I look for the Service Trust portal and for the compliance for the Poland resources. And in the Poland, we have several compliance guidelines and legal options. Of course, this is in Polish, so it's connected with the Polish governance. But these kind of regulations can look like this. And this is currently it's the compliance checklist for financial institutions in Poland. So basically, this is the quite huge document because it's over 100 pages, which tells us, let me scroll some pages. Where is this? Okay, so we can understand, for example, what is the service provider for us. And I found this, sorry. So for example, we have the requirement that financial institutions have specific knowledge of the process services configuration, contain consequences, there is certain architecture and of division of responsibilities for information security. And this guidance gives us the hints, what should we do in the Azure Cloud or in the Office 365 to meet this specific regulation and the requirements on us when we go in the financial industry to the cloud. We can also find, for example, more specific information about some kind of service, for example, virtual machines or app services, and the information what settings those services should have to match the regulations, the specific regulations. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so one of tools which I told you is Microsoft Purview Compliance Manager. However, I don't have this tool because I don't have subscription for Office 365. But it looks like this. So basically, we can find the compliance score and the various information about some regulations which we should meet, and what we should do to improve our infrastructure. For example, we should enable for all our employees the two-factor authentication. This is one of the examples. Okay, so how to design the compliance strategy when we go to the Azure Cloud? The first step, and I think the simplest one, is to start using the Azure Policy to enforce some organizational standards or assess compliance at scale. And we can go through these, we can design ourselves, we can design some policies and implement some initiatives to our infrastructure. We can, in the Azure Policy, we can, maybe I will show you already the Azure Policy portal. Or maybe I will not jump from the screen to screen, but go like this. So let's go to Azure Policy. So in the Azure Policy, we have the many definitions for the for the specific some regulation. For example, we have some standard policy like SQL Server integration service runtimes on Azure should be joined to a virtual network. But we can also find the definitions more specific to some kind of industry. Let's see if we find this. It's not working. Maybe like that. Okay, I found this. Okay, so for example, we have let's see. Oh, for example, we have the initiative for some Canada Federal PBMM initiative. So I suppose this is some Canadian requirements for the infrastructure. And what we have here some various policies. So for example, we have policy that two-factor authentication, MFA, should be enabled on accounts with owner permissions on your subscription. So when we start designing this in our infrastructure, we can use, for example, this kind of the initiative and load on our, for example, on the subscription level, but we can also do some adjustment to our specific needs for this definition. So here we have of course, when we start dealing with the policy definitions, we can also implement some actions against those resources which are affected by those policies. So this is the most easy step what we can do when we start designing the compliance strategy. Of course, if we already first meet the first step, that we go through the Trust Center portal and understand what regulations do we need exactly. So, but how to deal better with the policy when we have the Azure subscription? We can use we can start using the management groups. So basically, management group allow us to reproduce, for example, our enterprise organization. For example, as you can see on the screen, we have the root management group and we have the human resources, we have IT and marketing and so on. And we can specify, for example, that we put the initiative, as we can see on the previous screen, this Canadian initiative on the root management group. So this gives us this flexibility that we load this initiative for all resources and all management groups that are underneath the root group. So it is much easier to deal with those resources and organize everything. So if any organization part implement the new subscription or buy some services, those initiatives will be also implemented on those levels automatically. But we can go even further with this. And the next step is the Defender for the cloud. So when we have our first step, we have some kind of policy implemented already for our management group or subscription level. We can go to the Defender for the Cloud. And we can see that we have this regulatory compliance screen. And when we have some numbers, and we can go even deeper, and we can understand what type of policies currently is connected to our subscription, and what numbers do we meet from those subscriptions. And for example, as we have the ISO 27001, we know already that this regulation will be removed in some time, and we should take into consideration the much newer regulation from 2013 year, and we can go through the requirements which we should meet for these regulations. And for example, as the first step, we have the organization information security. So we can go to here much deeper, and we can understand that in 100% we meet those requirements for this specific regulation. But we have also some, let's see, the cryptography, and we can go here. And here we have the much more information. For example, the web application should only be accessible over HTTPS. And the portal, Defender for Cloud, give us the flexibility to quick fix this problem. So let's go. So we see that we have some affected web application. We can, for example, create the logic app for this to implement this, or we can quickly implement the fix. And after several minutes, it should be updated. We can also define some automatic actions. So when we have this regulation like that enable the HTTPS on a web application, it can be also implemented automatically to our infrastructure when we deploy some resources. And of course, it can be also requested by the policy, which have the remediation task to quickly solve these problems, this type of problems. Okay, do you have any questions maybe?
We have two questions on the chat. Maybe let's start with the first one that showed up. So the first question is, can you say something how the compliance score is calculated, how we get this value?
I don't remember from my head how this calculated, because on the Microsoft documentation, this is the quite huge algorithm how they calculate this. So maybe I find this to show. Maybe let's go. Okay, I found this. Probably this link. Okay, this is from Microsoft 365, but it should be mostly the same. Okay, not the same as in the Azure, but in the Office 365 or Microsoft 365, we have some kind of mandatory and optional actions that we should do on our infrastructure when we go through the compliance. and those with they have the type of mandatory, they have score 27, and so on. So when we go through the list, we should go from these highest priority tasks to have the much more score and improvement on our infrastructure and our data. And almost the same it works in the Azure cloud. In the Azure, let me try again. Yes. But in other words, it works almost the same. So as first, we should go from those with high priority tasks. I cannot find this right now. Sorry, I cannot find this right now, this algorithm. Okay.
Yeah,
another question.
Yeah, there is another question. So the question is about Microsoft Defender for Cloud and the things you showed us with this HTTPS and different rules.
Okay.
So is it included in free tier for Microsoft Defender for Cloud, or it's like extra tier?
It is the extra tier because when we implement the Defender for Cloud, we should, in the environment, we should enable for our, for example, in the root management group or the subscription level, we should enable the Defender for Cloud for the services, several services, and we should add of course, we should also add the initiatives. Some of them are out of the box enable, but we can also add more standards, like I add here the ISO from the 2013 year. But as when we start dealing with the Defender for Cloud, in most cases and most scenarios, it should be the standard tier of the Defender. So we should have enabled some services to monitor. In the Azure portal, and when we go to the policy, for example, we have also some definitions related to the Defender for Cloud. And we can also request to enable, for example, here we have Defender for Storage. Yeah, I will type the Azure Defender. So it will be, okay, so for example, we have Azure Defender for the app services. So we can request to be enabled by default the Azure Defender on our subscriptions or management groups. So it can happen automatically. Okay.
And I think it's like there is no other questions right now.
Okay, so let's go back to the presentations. Okay, so we have the Defender for Cloud we go through, but maybe I will show you a little more how to configure everything. So as I show you in the environment settings, we can configure what regulations we should meet on our subscription level. So we can, for example, we can add we have some default, as I say, we have some defaults, and we can add some custom initiatives. So we can design some hours organization specific needs, but we can, for example, let's add the HIPAA. You can add this and the subscription level. It will be enabled by default. And there is some parameters. Let's go like that. Okay, so this certificate. I don't have certificate. Okay, so I cannot deploy this regulation. Okay, but as you can see, we have here we have several regulations which we can deploy against our infrastructure and our data, and use in the Azure Defender. But when we have the Azure Defender, we should also export this data into Azure workspaces, analytical workspaces. And okay, go. So we have we export the information, and what this give us? When we go to the regulation compliance screen, we have the information about compliance over time. So we can open this and okay, so I don't have any data, so I cannot see. But basically, it should show us how our compliance goes over time. So do we improve something or not, or we are going even worse? Okay, so this is the Defender for the cloud, but we have also I say many things about the GDPR. And for example, when we have the Azure SQL databases, we have data discovery and classification. So basically, this gives us the information, what type of data we have in our database. For example, here, I will scroll out. Okay, so it looks like that. So for example, here we have some type of data which is treated as confidentially. Or we have some password hashes and so on, or the credit card approval code. So this is another tool which give us some hints and some actions what we can do with our data. So we are not, I would say, we are not blind what we have in our systems. So this is the one of tools which we can have for this. Okay, so we have the Defender for Cloud. But we can also go even further, because we started from the simple things like Azure Policy, and we have something like Azure Blueprints. The Azure Blueprints is the concept that our cloud architects or our teams can design some kind of specific and standards, patterns, and requirements for the infrastructure and for the data. And this can be used by teams, by various teams, to deploy the whole infrastructure, the complete infrastructure, together with the enabled policies and some specific regulations out of the box. And this kind of the blueprint is, for example, something like I find the Azure Security and Compliance Blueprint we have, the data warehouse for the GDPR. So in other words, this blueprint give us allow us to deploy the whole infrastructure. Maybe I will open the screen in the whole infrastructure, which we can see on this diagram, with all regulations required for the GDPR, the regulations in the European regions. Okay, so that's all from my side. about how we can design. So to summarize, the 3, maybe 4 steps which we need to do to have to implement the compliance strategy. The first step is to understand what regulations we should meet, and with this, the Trust Center portal helps us. The second step is to understand what type of data do we have in our infrastructure. And here, as example, the Azure SQL database, the classification, give us some hints. Or, for example, when we are using the data factory for some ETL processes, or not only, we have some services like Azure PureView, which also give us the information about data, what data we consume, and when this data is moved, transferred, and so on. The third step is to start from the most simple thing, like implementation of some kind of Azure policies, which require for example, to store our data in some specific regions. And we can deploy this on the level of the subscription, or we can improve this and start utilizing the management groups to have the more flexibility over time when our infrastructure starts growing. And the third step is to, it will be 5 steps, is to monitor everything using the Azure Microsoft Defender for the cloud, and track if our compliance score is improved or decreased, or we have some various other problems. And when we have the Azure Defender, when we have the Defender for the cloud, we can also implement some automatic logic to fix some issues in our infrastructure. And the fifth step is the using implementation of the Azure blueprints to allow our teams to deploy the whole infrastructure, which already out of the box meet our specific regulations for our industry. Okay, so thanks for. So this is all from my side. So do you have any?
One question: does Microsoft Defender has the ability to conduct the access review, the review of compliance in regular time periods?
Yes, because the Azure Defender for the cloud, we can. Let me go. I will share my screen again. A second. Basically, when we go to the regulatory compliance, we have the audit reports.
Okay.
This is the first part, when we can, for example, download some specific reports for our needs. I have the ISO. So as you can see, we have a lot of audit reports about ISO. And another part is we can, as I say, we can monitor the compliance over time. So when we have, because this monitoring is connected to the analytical workspaces. So when we have analytical workspaces, we can even export those data and give some notifications about any changes to the, for example, mailbox, right? And we can also have the capability to set up the auto refresh here. So this is another option. And another option is to only download the report, and we can take, for example, the ISO, the PDF, and okay, I will open this. So you can also open the report like that and go through the report. Go. And here we have the whole information about the subscription, what we meet or what we not meet.
Okay.
So we have also capability to do some manual works, but also it can be automated in some way.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, any other questions?
For me, it's okay.
Okay.
I think we can wrap this up.
Okay, so that was quick presentation. I hope helpful, and I give you some guidance what you can do in your infrastructure in the Azure cloud. And let's see in the next week. And Agnieszka will tell about, I don't remember about what we are telling.
So you showed us all extra things. We dive deeper. We are going to dive deeper into Azure Security Benchmark and how we can secure, like how we can approach security from Azure landing zone perspective. I see we have one more comment, one more question, sorry. Is the compliance score more important or security score more important for an organization in real lifetime scenario?
Mm-hmm. From my perspective, I think that security score will be, as first step, it will be much more important because this gives us the Azure security against Azure security benchmarks. So they give us the much more improvement over security and over security of our data in the infrastructure. And as the next step, the compliance score. But of course, if we are some highly regulated industry like healthcare or financial, it could. I think that the both can be most important. As soon as some audit came to us,